One simple thing that's very easy to understand and incredibly hard to do. There's one way to go from zero to here efficiently and effectively and realistically. Let's say it took you a year, 2 years, 3 years to go from brand new to this. There's only one way you're going to do it, and that's with working under somebody that are masters at what they do. And what you're going to find is that you have a lot more to learn than you think. All right, guys, this is going to be my first tutorial that I've ever made regarding a tattoo, and this is going to be on a portrait that I recently did, and it's a perfect time of the year to be sharing it. Here we go. So this is a Santa tattoo. That's right, I finally got to tattoo Santa. This is the real Santa, not the fake Santa. So this is going to be a full walkthrough with the colors that I use, the tools from the machine and the pigments, the thought process, the ups and the downs. There was quite a bit of struggles. This is an 8-hour tattoo. Maybe somewhere around 7, but of course the guy was here all day and we sat down. It felt like a marathon, and I'm going to give you guys some of the tips and the tricks of how I accomplished this, but also just a real general breakdown. And welcome to my very first tattoo tutorial. So the first thing I'm going to say to you right away is, in doing a piece like this, whether you're watching this and you've just started or you're experienced, maybe this is something out of your level, which is probably why you're watching this. I know in the past years, especially with the advent of YouTube, I would say that it's helped me as an artist tremendously. So this is something I'm hoping will help you as well. In watching this, I think what you will see, and what I'm hoping you'll find, is that step by step, it's an arduous process. It's incredibly hard, it's incredibly difficult, and it definitely felt like a marathon. And in saying this, what I'd like to point out is patience. Patience is everything on this. You cannot rush it. You cannot cheapen any of the stuff that you're using. You can't try to cut corners whatsoever. If you cut corners regarding needles, maybe you don't want to get one out. Maybe you don't have one. Maybe you are trying to use less for budget reasons. Maybe you're not trying to get out as much pigment as you actually need, which, for example, some of the pigments that I did use, surprisingly on this palette, it wasn't a whole ton. I've had definitely palettes out much bigger than this. But, you cannot shortcut those. If you shortcut those, you're just tying your hands behind your back. So get out the colors you need, get out the tools you need. Don't be afraid to use the needles you want, or even try a needle. And if you end up not using it in something like this regarding a tattoo that's this intense, then you definitely don't want to shortchange yourself. I go real serious when it comes to my environment, all the way down to the tools I'm using. Make sure my lighting's right. Sometimes when I'm doing this, obviously, making sure my camera's right. Make sure my client's taken care of so that I can sit down and really focus on that tattoo, even all the way down to figuring out what we're going to eat mid-tattoo, considering it's going to take all day. With that being said, let's get into the tattoo, and I'm going to show you guys what it is that I started with, why, and the hardest part about it, to be honest with you. Right out of the gate, you can see with this tattoo, before I show you the time lapse of the video and walk you through it, this part of the actual tattoo here is obviously a green beard. I think it's easy for you to see now that it's a tattoo, but when I first started it, especially with the reference that I used, it wasn't so obvious to me when I started with the beard that it should be so green. I'm glad I stuck to what I saw, not what I wanted to see in terms of the colors. So in getting this all done, I really feel like I nailed the colors as close as I could, and this being one of my first actual color portraits in a very long time. I usually mostly work with black and gray lately, but this color portrait really stretched me and it really pushed me, and definitely genuinely felt like a marathon, no doubt. So we're going to break down some of these colors. I'm going to show you real quick before we get into it, some of the methodology that I use for attempting something like this. And here is basically what I like to do to accomplish this task. One is, you heard me talk about the environment and the tools and get everything set up. The next is having a really, really good reference. If you don't have a good reference, you're not going to have a great tattoo. Especially if you're limited artistically and trying to push yourself. Maybe there's colors you can't see, so you need reference for that. Maybe there's images and shapes and things that you need to study before you even get into it. Taking your time is everything. Preparing is everything. And I would say, with this being a 6-7 hour tattoo, maybe 8 or 9 hour day for the customer, I probably spent a good hour to hour and a half, maybe a little longer, in studying this, going through images, bringing it up on my iPad, looking at the colors, in my kit and kind of holding them together. A lot of times what I would do is I would zoom in, look at a color, especially here on the iPad. It's very useful to use the app I'm on right now. And this app really helps me to, zoom in and pick the colors that I know I see and not the colors that I want to see. That's probably the hardest part with color tattoos, is tattooing what's there, not what you would like to be there. And that's where people go wrong. I actually just watched a video recently that a guy had mentioned something as a really good point to bring up, that you end up tattooing what's there, not what you think you see, which means there's zero room for imagination when it comes to trying to nail a picture in which is your reference and not adding your imagination to it. So you're really just trying to put what you see there as accurately as possible. There are some tweaks to be made, of course, in terms of technicalities, because you're working on skin. You're not working on white paper or a digital platform like this that can start from pure white and achieve pure black. We're working with skin tone, so it already starts to fluctuate your palette a little. So there is some room for adjustment, but I would say imagination, things like this, is definitely taken out of. Some people might be sort of surprised to actually hear that, thinking that this is something that's in the artist's head, but I would say for sure that it's definitely going to be more you copying what it is you see. So here's the tattoo, and we're going to get into the video and talk about the process, at least the thought process regarding what it is that I did. So of course playing the stencil is incredibly important because you want it to stick, but I think as long as you do a good job there, and I mean I can make a 20-minute video about a good stencil, but applying the stencil properly so that while you're working it sticks is incredibly important. But also, while you're working on a tattoo like this, chances are that the stencil is going to be on there for quite some time, mainly because this tattoo is obviously not going to be short. So by the time you start working your way up, maybe a quarter of the way, that stencil has been on there for well over an hour, which is plenty adequate of time for the actual stencil to stick. Sometimes stick a little too good. You gotta wipe a little bit off when you're working with the lighter colors. So this beginning part, especially with the beard, and by the way, guys, I'm not going to bore you with the whole beard, just for the simple fact that it's kind of repetitive over and over, and it's probably the majority of this piece actually, and definitely the majority of the time. So I'm going to show you the beginnings and kind of what I was thinking going through this. The first thing I was thinking, and this is no stretch of the imagination at all, this is as accurate as I could give it to you. When I started doing this part of the tattoo, I actually thought to myself, I might be fucking it up, so I'm going to call a friend who's much better at color than I am. It's actually a friend of mine here that works as an artist in our shop, and she is a wizard when it comes to color use. So I called her and actually sent her a picture of this green beard and thought, man, does it look like I'm doing this right, or am I somehow maybe going a little more green than I should? And she definitely encouraged me to stay the course because it looked like I was doing the right thing. And I wasn't completely unsure, but it is definitely weird to do something like this and look at it before it's finished, right? To look at the parts you're doing without, right now it's just full green, so I don't have any real warm tones or skin or fleshy tones or anything to kind of offset it. So it just seemed really powerful in terms of being green. And that made it really, really difficult to, I guess, trust yourself in the process. But that's exactly what you have to do. You have to slow down. There are so many times where I stop and just stare at it and look at the reference, come back, look at the reference. There's times where I, get the iPad out as my reference and, take my gloves off and get deeper into the image just to make sure that what I'm doing is correct. And see, in this part, really what I'm doing at the beginning, and I should have said this at the forefront of this video starting, this time-lapse part of it, I was really getting to know the colors before I really went too far into this image. So what I wanted to do was really play around with the colors and kind of jump around a little and establish some shapes, and get to know my palette really well, which is really, really important, especially in something really colorful or that's, eventually supposed to be, your attempt is to make it realistic or some sort of hyper-realism or caricatures or something like that. You definitely want to establish your colors. Yeah, you see in this part, I'm kind of adding some darks to the lights and, again, kind of getting a feel for maybe how dark or how light things need to be. Again, the only reference I have is the photo, because you can see it up there in the top right. It's quite green, the photo, and it's very deceiving, because in the end, when this tattoo's finished, I don't think, it screams green beard. It screams beautiful tattoo, and you just have to trust it. You have to trust what's there, not what you want to be there. So going through some of these colors, you could look at the palette that I have out. This palette that I was using, this is really a good reference for that palette. This is just a picture I took during the tattoo. I like to try to remember actually what colors I used and why, in case there's ever need for a touch-up, or even in the future if I want to look back and wonder how I achieved certain colors or tones, what was the palette I used, and I can use this as reference, which I do often. So in this color layout, you'll definitely see lots of muted colors, some pretty bright colors, and really this image is a lot of green, a lot of yellow, a lot of brown, a little bit of pink and red. And so, I use this for reference for the future when I'm looking back from other tattoos of however it is that I achieved the tattoo that I did. So of course, tattooing Santa Claus is awesome, but some of the beard gets a little monotonous. And at the end, again, I'll break down some of the things that I even think I could have done better, much less the things that I definitely did right. During a tattoo, you always, and whenever I'm teaching this to an apprentice, I'm definitely trying to explain that, you want to, and we'll jump ahead a little. So now we're getting into some actually kind of warmer tones right there in the green beard to kind of neutralize it a little bit, going back and forth. Still at this point, very much trying to understand colors. Still trying to use the palette and understand the palette way before I get close to the face. So this is a great way to do it. Usually the neck, the shoulders, the background is a good way to start to understand your canvas and understand your palette, and the technique and the person's skin, of course. So in saying that, looking at what I'm doing here, especially establishing shapes, you'll hear it a lot that you really want to work like a printer and just kind of start from the bottom, working up, being very careful to protect your stencil. But even more important is protect your lights and your darks. And this is what, again, I teach my apprentices all the time. You really want to protect your lights and your darks. When you're looking at an image like this, you want to be able to step back from it, and you want to be able to see, and I'll switch to this camera here so you guys can kind of see that. You want to see what parts of this need to stay warm, which parts need to be a little brighter, a little more, whether it's yellow or leaning towards red or whatever color you're using here, as well as protecting your highlights. In this picture, it was really strong highlights on the right side of the face. And so if you're seeing this area up here, almost a big half moon shape, this area I really was being very careful not to overwork. Matter of fact, I usually have to remind myself to protect it, pretty aggressively, because you'll be tempted to put a lot of information in there when it doesn't need it. And if it does need it, you can always come back and work your way into it, and still respecting how light it has to be. With tattooing, you can definitely put in the color you want and come back and do light adjustments if you're not going in, just completely ham and making sure you're not, completely damaged the skin 100%. You can always come back and add your layers, and oftentimes that's what you need to do. There's no way in one tattoo video like this, there's no way that I could obviously tell you everything that you need to know about tattooing or how to achieve this. And this might be a little above, your skill level. If you're watching this, I doubt if it's below your skill level, you'll be watching this. I don't know why you would, unless you just wanted to see my beautiful face. This sort of process is, of course, this is a time lapse, so it's a lot faster, but it is so slow that it's quite testing. You really have to. Matter of fact, I would say if there's something that took my portraits to another level, it's slowing down even slower than you think, to the point to where you could almost say move in slow motion, like really stop what you're doing, take breaks, take moments, reflect, look at what you're doing, process it as it's starting to build, because you really don't have a lot of room for error if you start going too dark, if you start really applying the wrong color. So being very patient with this is key. See, this part of the tattoo, I actually jumped ahead a little because I really needed to see some of the warmer tones. And so I'm using a lot of brown here, almost no real true red. Matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and pause this for just a second, and I'm going to bring you guys over to my iPad. And I'm going to show you something really important regarding this process. So with looking at these tones and the tone that you just saw me using there on the mouth, it's really important to understand that, whatever you think you see is maybe not what's actually there. The eyes definitely play tricks on you. If you're not aware of this, you can Google search this, look up color optical illusions in art, and you will find all kinds of ways that images and colors and things of that nature just distract you and disrupt you in your understanding. So that being said, when I was working on the mouth, especially with the original reference, what had happened was I was looking at the mouth thinking he has really red lips and quite a reddish sort of toned tongue, and it really quickly turned out to be less true, and I was using more browns to make it more accurate. Same with his cheeks, which we'll get to here shortly. They definitely looked red to me, but if I were to go, let's see, I'm going to go ahead and use this app for us real quick to be able to color pick some of this and show you guys. So if I were to go in here and look at this, this is the original reference. If I were to go in here and pick these areas in his cheeks that are seemingly red, this is definitely more of a brick red, brown, maybe even straight brown in here. And again, going to this cheek over here, there's a lot of reddish looking colors, but it's a lot more brick looking. So there's less of a real true red in there than you think. Same with his mouth. That's not what we want to do. So let's color pick this little area here so you can kind of see. Again, this is red to brownish tones. So you're really not putting in like some pure lipstick red or something. Most of these colors aren't going to be tackled like that, as a matter of fact. So go back to the video. Watching the mouth kind of come to life was exciting because it helped me to understand the green tones and whatnots that I was using before. That was very difficult to get this far. You often start a piece like this and are very underwhelmed with the product for quite some time and overwhelmed with the task. So the image is not rewarding, I would say. And I remind myself this a lot in a full color portrait. It takes a lot of focus, a lot of effort and mental energy, physical too. And it's a lot of pain on the client. So, you really want to do this correctly and do it properly. But when you're going to a piece like this and you're reminding yourself to slow down and do it properly, it might even actually be faster than as if you just tried to rush it. One is because if you try to rush it, you're going to have to come back to it. You're going to screw it up. You might overwork it. It's going to heal bad. It's going to be scarred. You're going to have all kinds of other problems. Doing it the right way is always the right way. So slow down and take your time. So establishing, again, some of these greens, I be totally truthful. This is where you have to really remind yourself, this beard is really, again, underwhelming. It's not very exciting to see come to life. So it's very hard to get excited about, these next 3 hours that I've been working on, a very complex piece and not getting a whole lot of reward. So I have to keep reminding myself just to slow down. There's not a whole lot of excitement going on in your head at this point. And really for hours, you're just hoping that it all turns out correctly because you don't really see it for what it is yet. I see a lot of people get excited about the features in a tattoo, the main features, which no doubt are incredibly important, but they're just as important as the rest of the tattoo. So slowing down and making sure you're doing these parts right is crucial. And even though it might seem like just a curl in the beard or a little shadow under the mustache, it's just as important as the nose or the eyes. The part, especially at the beginning, the part I really wanted to get to, for me, which was exciting, was the real rosy cheeks, the big, rich, sort of brick red, bright cheeks. Understanding this, and studying this piece before I started really showed me that it goes from a very bright green, very yellow tone in the beard to a very red sort of apple color sort of brick tone in the middle part of the face and the cheeks and nose. And then after that, it gets very yellow and very gold very quickly, kind of a ochre color in the forehead. And so understanding that sort of shift in the color palette as we go from the bottom to the top really helped me to be patient as well, just because, again, this is an all-day project and you want to definitely make sure that you're not rushing it for any reason whatsoever. So here I am actually being impatient. To be honest, I couldn't tell you if I was being impatient or if it was the right thing to do, but it looks like I'm jumping a little bit. And I think this is where I'm getting excited about seeing some of those colors next to the green. I'd been working for quite a few hours and seeing, again, very little reward and wanting to see a little bit come to life at this point. So don't worry about the hat, guys, too, but it'll be out of the frame here pretty soon. We did correct that. It was very quickly pointed out to me by everybody that I was in the way. It's also very difficult. If you're wondering why I'm doing this sort of voiceover time lapse for this tutorial, if it's not clear to you, it's really simple. In tattooing this, there's no way I'm explaining it at the same time. It would take an eternity and it would be incredibly frustrating. And worrying about the cameras, worrying about what I'm saying, if I'm covering everything, stopping and taking breaks and distracting myself would be just not the proper way to get this tattoo done the way I wanted to. So here we go with the really warm colors. Again, this part incredibly exciting, shifting from the bottom of that cheek to from greens to reds and the browns was really exciting. Seeing that come to life was probably the first point in which I thought maybe I am actually doing this tattoo correctly. So if it sounds like I doubt myself throughout this process, it's not that I doubt my skill level or ability. It's that I doubt whether or not it's coming out as great as I'd like it to be. There's always, if you're pushing yourself, you're not always going to be satisfied 100% with all it is that you're doing. Now, if you're trying to get better and you're trying to push the envelope, there's going to be times where you screw that up. That's just part of the process. And so, of course, always doing your due diligence best you can is going to avoid catastrophes, but there's always going to be things you wish you did differently. There's something that helped me take this actual tattoo to a total different level. And I'll share that with you guys. It's kind of the philosophy of the tattoo in a sense, or of art or color, is really studying and understanding color. In doing so, it's not just, always doing it by yourself either. You need help. You're going to need somebody that's a master at what they do. And I am just so lucky enough to actually be working again with somebody here in my studio, the artist named Midna. And you can actually see her. You can go to our website or go to our Instagram and see her linked in there. Go to her Instagram as well, Legend of Midna, and check her out. She's a wizard with color, especially when it comes to painting. So what helped me take this portrait to the extent in which it eventually did, in its finished project, was really, I'll credit 100% to the ability for me to get as far as I could with my understanding, but then my limitations were understanding color. Understanding color is massive. I would actually say that to tattoo this, even if, because you're looking at a photo, for example, these tones that are in these images, when you're looking at this, now that I see it, I see all the tones correctly. But when I was first looking at it, there was things I didn't see. I definitely didn't see, which is strange to point out now because I see it, obviously. I see this huge green beard, and when I first started, I did not see it. I had to convince myself this beard was green. So I don't know if you guys struggle with that or if that's a problem for you, but I imagine for a lot of people out there, you're looking at certain images and not able to understand how somebody achieved something. And I will tell you right now, for me, what really took it to the other level, to the next level, is understanding what these colors are and where you would use them and why, and understanding that they're maybe not the colors you think you're seeing. If you were to use Fire Engine Red throughout this cheek here, thinking, well, it looks red to the naked eye, and not really going in deeper and trying to color pick and understand like you can with some of these cool, awesome tools, you might really be missing a lot of opportunities to, again, take your tattoos to a completely different level. Training your eye to see colors is, to me, just as important as training your eye to see shapes. Whenever I'm looking at shapes, I'm always identifying what shape I'm trying to create. And then secondly, what kind of tone, whether it's black and gray portraits or something like this with color, full color. I'm always paying a deep, close attention to the tones that I'm using and the shapes I'm trying to create. It helps obviously just to copy the picture best you can, like a machine if you could. That would be great. But our thoughts and our distractions often come into play, and we often get fatigued, tired, our hands start to hurt, and we're doing certain areas, especially here in this cheek, where it is incredibly complex with anything from browns and pinks and greens and yellows. Just right here in this small area, you can see a huge color shift. If I move this, you see anything from salmons to pink to white. You move up further, you get more of a flesh tone kind of pink color. And again, you come back in here and there's these pinks, there's brick, just dark, almost black in there. It's a real dark brown. So you're just getting a whole array of colors, even all the way down here into the sort of more yellow colors. Further down you go, you get a little more green. So it's very complex, and you guys got to make sure that when you're doing things like this, you're taking your time to understand that and to recognize it before you get there. That's also incredibly important. So talking again about protecting your highlights and protecting your darks, it's really imperative that you recognize in your reference where there's actual black, not just where there's dark areas. I definitely have had in the past a lot of good advice from great artists. One of the things, it would be nice if we had is somebody that can look at your work and just say, hey, here's what you did wrong, so you can start to see it. But that also implies that you're willing to listen and even looking for that answer or that response, that feedback. And, you have to get your ego out of the way to be able to learn some of this stuff, because you're going to think you know it. You're going to think that looks easy. You're going to think all kinds of shit that's egotistically sort of satisfying. And what you're going to find is that you have a lot more to learn than you think. And that can be very daunting. And it should be, because if you want to be great at something, it's not supposed to be easy. Otherwise it wouldn't be great. And this is definitely not for everybody. If you're watching this and you're not a tattooer, which is possible, maybe you're just interested in seeing the process. Something a lot of people don't realize is how much time goes into this type of work. Tattoos in general are, they're definitely you need to be very skillful. You need to be very meticulous. You have to be careful. You have to be professional if you want them to be great. If you really want to push the level and be at like sort of the forefront of tattooing in terms of skill level, you have a long road ahead of you, especially if you're just starting out. You got to be patient. And if there's one thing I could say, especially about tattooing, but this is really true with anything you're attempting. This is actually pretty great, by the way. We're 26 minutes into a 50-minute time lapse, and it seems like watching it this fast is very satisfying compared to being the one doing it and taking so long. But anyway, what I was going to say is, if you want to get, let's say you're just starting tattooing, or you're somewhere between just starting and something like what I'm doing here in this Santa Claus portrait. Say you're somewhere between those areas, and you want to get you want to really increase your skill and get a lot better. The fast track to getting better is really, really simple. You might think it's work. You might think it's time. You might think it's money. You might think it's all kinds of things, and sure, those come into play. But I will tell you this one simple thing that's very easy to understand and incredibly hard to do. There's one way to go from zero to here efficiently and effectively and realistically. Let's say it took you a year, 2 years, 3 years to go from brand new to this. There's only one way you're going to do it, and that's with working under somebody or with a few people that are masters at what they do, that are way greater than you at what you do, and you can just be as close to them as possible in every way. Be around them, work around them, communicate with them, listen to them, watch them, just soak it all in. Just by proxy and being in the proximity of somebody. I will tell you right now that will be the fastest track for you to go from wherever you are now and watching this to maybe getting something like this done to maybe even, something greater, and hopefully one day will be. I often think to myself, if I could tattoo this good when I first started, meaning if I was tattooing this well, 20 years ago, I would be, I would be world renowned. Meaning, back then the skill level wasn't here. Things change rapidly, and the skill level in tattooing has just jumped through the roof in the last decade. And you see people today doing stuff that just absolutely blows your mind. I even look at some of these tattoos that people do, and I have to really get into them and zoom into them and sort of pixel peep and try to understand what they did, because even being a tattoo artist and able to accomplish, this Santa portrait, it still blows my mind what people can do. And wherever it's going, it's like, how much farther does it go from here? Do people make tattoos that are, would confuse you between tattoos and reality? I mean, how far does it go? It's exciting. It's exciting to ponder that and even to be a part of an industry that's growing so quickly. So you can now really start to see at this point, and we're technically halfway through the tattoo at this exact spot regarding time. Now you can start to see it coming to life. So here's where, as a tattooer, the experience comes and really hits you in the face that what you're doing is correct, pun intended. And when you're doing something like this, see, now that I wiped it off there, you can see when you're doing something like this, it's incredibly exciting. You're getting the right colors, you understand your palette, you understand the person's skin, you got all the tools out you need, you're rocking and rolling, you're starting to see it come to life, and the reward is there because you are patient and diligent. If you look at the colors I'm using again here, you could rewatch this video, zoom in and start to see that the colors that I'm using might not be the colors you thought that I would be using. It's very, again, for me, it's always been very difficult to understand color, so I'm sure a lot of you out there are the same. And seeing some of these colors I'm using now, like this bright yellow right there in the center of his face, using some of the brick colors that I thought were red instead. Even in the eyes, that's a good one when we get there. A lot of times I always used to put white in the whites of the eyes, and that's incorrect. If we really zoom in on a picture of somebody's face, especially in color, it's not typically white. It looks very fake if you do that. So hopefully there we go. We wipe it down and you can see in fine detail some of the layers that I'm doing now. So the amount of colors you have in just one small area, especially here in the eyes, is pretty intense. So the colors that I'm using, I showed you guys the palette at the beginning of this, but it's mostly, most of the time when I'm doing something like this, I'm going to be using Fusion. It's one of my favorites to work with. It's thick enough that it seems pliable, and I don't like watery inks. They bother me. I just don't enjoy using them. I really like using this brand. It seems to, work really well for me. The needle configurations that I decided to use in this, also, not cutting any corners. I didn't use a ton of needles. There's plenty of times I have 7, 8 needles out, depending on what I'm doing. This is a lot of small detail, not a whole lot of big areas that are colored in or solid. So I believe I used a 9 round shader for the details and the smaller stuff. I could have went smaller, but I didn't want to make this too sharp. I kind of wanted to go for more of a realistic look, more sort of human look. I used a 9, which is probably what you're seeing here. I used a 9 curve mag, a 13 curve mag, and I believe 27. I wish I knew it. It was either a 27 or a 23 curve mag as well, bug pins, so that I can get a lot of fine detail. So again, looking at some of these colors, I'm going to switch this camera so you guys can see on the iPad here. Some of these colors in the mustache, I'm protecting this highlighted area. I'm protecting it like it's your child, because if you start going into it, you really ruin the area and you can never get it back. So, don't, skip on protecting those areas, whether it's the darks or the lights, making sure your darks are only where they belong and the lights are only where they belong. I've seen a lot of tattoos where people will go into the dark areas and just put black because they think it's black, and they don't mute them down with brown or purples or blues when oftentimes they need to be. Paying close attention again over and over in your mind, just reminding yourself, pay attention to the colors you're using. Right now I'm using a very, very faint color. In the picture, it's almost undetectable, but there's a very minty sort of color filling in some of these lighter areas. Still being very cautious to protect those highlights. And then when people overwork the darks, it takes the power away from wherever it does actually need to be dark. And the same thing happens for the highlights. If you oversaturate the highlights or kill them, it will absolutely underwhelm you with that area. Just there's no way to really revive it and bring it back. So it's a lot like caring for something you love. You have no options but to protect it thoroughly. So these are things that go through my mind as I'm doing these tattoos and really getting into them and wanting them to come out as good as possible. And there's a lot of adjustment that's possible if you tattoo correctly as well. If you're not over damaging the skin, it's not getting super red or irritated, and you're being gentle but appropriate as well. Some people think you need to go light on the tattoo so that you don't hurt the person, which is not usually the case. You want to commit to what you're doing, especially if like here, I'm doing some very light pink flesh tones. I don't want to take too much time in blending because I want to create as little irritation in that area as possible without having to come back. And this is a good point too. I just jumped to the side of the right face before that stencil starts disappearing, so I can now establish those highlights that don't really need a lot of pigment in them. So I went straight to these darker areas. Again, I'll jump back to this. So I went to these darker areas that you see me working on here now, because I wanted to protect these lighter areas. And once I get the dark established, it'll really tell me how much of this area in the field needs to be colored in. So I jumped to that, got some of these shapes established. Again, very rewarding because now you're really starting to see the full thing come together. And as a person sitting here for this long, even the customer, it's very nice to get to this point and you can start to see something you can be proud of. So again, reminding yourself this is shapes and tones or values, that doing it correctly is important, and taking your time and slowing down. I see people rush all the time, and I've had a tendency to do this as well. When you're doing something seemingly insignificant, whether it's a little earlobe or a tiny bit of hair, something kind of plain, like a lot of people skimp the hair, it's just inappropriate. It's wrong. If you're doing it wrong, it's wrong. So slow down, take your time, and do it right. If you make a mistake and you're going slow, and I don't mean unnecessarily slow, I mean appropriately slow, that if you're unsure about something, start with what is there, what you do know, and start working your way through it. If you, for example, if you can't see, I'm going to go ahead and pause this and kind of explain this to you guys here for a second, because this is something that, again, that I often do and remind myself. This is a very complicated area, mainly because of the amount of colors that are coming through here, but also the shapes. None of these shapes are very clear, obvious shapes. You're not creating a nose or a cheek or, even one of these bells. It's just very cloudy, messy, undefined areas. Really, this kind of whole hat and rear part of this is like that. So here's what I like to do. And by no means is this the only way to do it, or is it maybe even what some would consider the right way to do it, but this is how I did it. Coming through this area, what I would do and what I did with the stencil is I very clearly recognize the shape in which the hair creates, and that's part of my stencil. After I start working on that, those darker areas to border this so that that shape is finally established, what I'm doing is I'm really this whole time relying, which is really where the energy drain comes from when you're tattooing this. I'm relying on this reference, and I'm looking back at the tattoo constantly. Probably sometimes looking at the reference more than the actual tattoo, because I'm studying the reference to be able to transfer it to the tattoo. Because as you start to study it and look at it, you start to see way more colors, you start to see way more shapes happening, and way more tones. You start to get familiar with it. So a lot of times I'll work on a small area, and I'll establish all the tones that I know are there. And as you start to get lost in these sort of confusing areas, as you start to create these little shapes that are clearer than others, whether it's these little, check marks here in the green, this little green shape and the pink coming into it, and you can see some of the purples and maybe even some of the pinkish colors coming in through here. As you create these outer shapes, it's easier to start closing in, and almost like putting a puzzle together. As you start to close in, things start to make more sense. You start to get almost a roadmap, at least outlined, so that you know what direction to go in. And so sometimes starting in a place that you're not sure of is the wrong way to go. You want to establish what's there and what you do know, and slowly. And sometimes that means you have to jump around a little bit so that you can start to see it come to life, so you can blend and pack in correctly, so you're not doing things inappropriately. Again, really exciting, this part, to see. Well, by the way, you'll notice the hat doesn't take me any time at all because the amount of detail is very minor. Let's go to this and I'll show you what we're creating here, these shapes. So that's all I'm looking at here, is just the shapes and the tones that I mean to use. The darks and the lights. This hat is very simple, so it ends up going really quick when I switch to once I establish these colors, it seems like the hat goes really fast. I should say, once I established these shapes and had them there, I was easy to rock and roll really quick. And I wasn't rushing it because I was bored of the hat. The hat itself is fairly simple and didn't require a bunch of detail, and sometimes that's how you bring the detail to other areas, is adding less detail, or at least keeping from adding detail if it's not in the picture. It may be for a reason. It's easy to tattoo over and make things look overly sharp. I actually tend to do that in a lot of my work. I'm really working on trying to make things look softer. I find that using bigger needles and shading the shapes in, as opposed to packing them in, building them up slowly. If I slowed this image down, you'd probably see me doing that now, where I'm more building up the shapes so it's a little softer, instead of packing them in so that they have a sort of hard separation. So here's where the hat almost gets concluded really quickly, just because, again, it's a very simple area to be able to create. I would probably estimate that I spent less than maybe 30 minutes on the back part of the hat. It seemed to have gone really quickly. And then in these areas, again, with this image you're seeing, I'm protecting a lot of these highlights, so there's not a whole lot going on inside of this band and on the top of his hat. And then you see this nice, beautiful green, this lime, almost kind of neon green coming through here. It goes from green to a brighter yellow at the top. And you can almost tell some of these tones I'm putting in are about as washed out, watered down, or even grayed out as possible, so that they're very faint. Once the end product comes in, it's still information, but it's not distracting, and it's filling in enough that the hat itself doesn't look unfinished. But I'm still protecting that beautiful layer of skin right there that I want to maintain as a highlight. Matter of fact, I would say this picture, if I was studying this picture and trying to explain it to somebody else, I would say it's an overexposed photo on one side and an underexposed on the other, where you're getting really dark areas in the face, and then on this right side is incredibly overexposed. But that's the picture, and it looks great, so I'm still trying to maintain that without trying to correct the picture somehow and add all kinds of useless information that just, dims down the whole thing. Again, some of these colors I'm using are very either watered down, grayed out, or even using a lot of white in them, so that they're not distracting and they're not at all taking away from the highlighted area. And you see me kind of going now from the top down to the bottom, because that bottom right part of the beard, especially this area, is very confusing. It was for me, at least, and working with it, I didn't want it to look insane. There's no lines in it, so it's easy to make it look distracting, and I didn't want that to happen. So I did come back once the hat was done, so I could really adjust it and make myself happy there. So this must be a little break, which I did take a few. There wasn't a whole lot of them, but there was one, I think, a good probably hour long, and you see the stencils hanging out there with us. So at this point, like most tattooers, you're kind of the spot where you're thinking, man, it looks good, I love it, now I just have all this other boring stuff to do. I got some background and some hair. It's, again, you you have to do it correctly. You have to slow down. You have to do it right and not rush things. Whether it seems like it's an easy part or not, you want to do it appropriately. And if anybody is wondering what that is on the left side of the face there, you'll see when he rolls over, that's just some Sanoderm over an old tattoo he'd gotten a couple of days prior. Safe to say he's addicted to tattoos. This leg will be covered in no time. You know, understanding, and I haven't really talked about this yet, you know what helps to understand color theory? It helps to understand, matter of fact, it's necessary to understand to some degree and be always working on your skills as a professional. You know, you're not going to achieve this kind of stuff if you're not acting like a professional, if you're not acting like a professional in your business, your career, in your skills, as well as the tattoo process. And what I mean by that is, if you are treating your practice, your talents, this is again most of my head here, so I'll bring me in so it's not so boring. If you're treating this like you're a hobbyist, you're not going to get here. You need to treat yourself like a professional, because you need to learn colors, you need to learn tones, hues, saturation, you need to know shapes and realism if that's what you're going for. Whatever it is you're trying to learn, you need to think of it professionally. You really need to pour your heart and soul into stuff like this. You're just not going to achieve it with a relaxed attitude. So it's exciting to watch these tutorials. I know it was for me, especially when YouTube started. It's really exciting to think that you can learn and watch people that are amazing at what they do. But at the same time, the gap between you and getting here, or to whatever, some of the artists I look up to, the gap between me and them, I know is a lot of work. So understanding why blue helps with the warmer tones and even kind of muting some of the cooler tones, using blue to kind of neutralize the green helps massively. Understanding that everybody's skin has different tones in it. Some people lean more towards the warmer or cooler scales, and you got to understand that in your tattoo as well. This guy's really light skinned, so I'm able to achieve a lot of values. I got a huge spectrum of different tools I can use in a piece like this. This is where it really comes to life, because again, I'm maintaining, and I'll show you guys here on the iPad as well, I'm really maintaining these overexposed highlighted areas, and it's really cool because you don't need a lot of information in them to have this really great effect, especially when I get into the wrinkles of the forehead. You'll start to see it just really pop out because I protect these wider areas. So you could be tempted to say, all I have to do is copy the picture, right? Why do I need to know all this other shit about art? If I could just look at the picture and get really good at copying it. Well, theoretically that sounds correct. But what's ironic is, especially if you ever try to paint or draw real life, what you'll notice is shapes aren't what you think they are, and colors aren't what you think they are. So you have to train yourself to see shapes correctly, to see them accurately, and then to be able to translate that into what you're doing. It's not as easy as you think if you've ever tried it, So understanding all of these tools as a professional is really important to be able to achieve this. Because again, you could use the iPad and say, well, what if I just look at this area and color pick it and say, well, that's kind of like, an ochre yellow, so why don't I just use that? Why do I need to understand the colors if I can see them here? Well, one is, go ahead and try, and you'll notice that you're wrong about the colors and you're wrong about how to accomplish certain effects. So, you really need to know all that you can so you can have an arsenal of tools to pull from. I know I've seen pieces before where, people, especially in person, where you're seeing them and people don't even believe they're real. I think people have gotten really used to seeing this type of stuff through media today. It's gotten very exciting. So it's very quick for people to feel like they're professionals and they've never even done this before, or they think they know something because they've seen somebody do it. This video, for example, you guys watching it, this will never substitute the real thing. You're never going to watch this and then just go from 0 to 100. This is going to be little incremental stages of you getting better and moving forward just by watching something like this, and your journey should continue from there. You just keep pressing on and learning lots of little things. especially with the actual tattoo itself and understanding the colors and understanding, the process, it's going to take you a very long time. And the more you're working with a master and the more you're learning from somebody who is already doing the thing is really important. A whole nother subject is how to get somebody to teach you, or at least to get close enough to them that you could learn from them. It's a totally different subject and probably just as important as the tattooing itself. So this is where I got to the point where I'd ask myself, when am I done? Kind of keep looking at it and kind of keep adding little pieces to it so that I'm not rushing it, but at the same time, I'm putting in all the little details that I know it needs. In this overexposed area, as you can see, as I'm copying it and I'm looking at the reference and I'm looking at the tattoo, I'm really going slow. Again, really difficult to tell in a time lapse, but I'm taking my time. Often the customer will look at me and they'll say, is everything okay? How's it looking? Because they get nervous that I'm just staring at the tattoo and staring at the iPad. They think something's wrong, but it's really just the process. And there we go. On that side of the overexposed face is really coming to life with some of these really fine details. There's probably a lot you're going to get out of this if you're watching this full thing. I contemplated slowing the footage down a little and making it a few hours long, considering it's almost a 7-hour tattoo. But I think by watching this, I hope what you get out of it, one, is watching the process come to life. And there's Midna's tattoo, by the way. She's been tattooing for a year and she gets to pull that shit off. She's amazing. I've been doing it for 20 years and it took me this long to get here, but Santa loves me, so it's all good. There we are, cleaning it off, taking a look. I hope what you get out of this is, small tips to move you forward, because that's really what it's going to be. It's not always large jumps. It's very, very rare large jumps. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the story before regarding the penny. People ask, would you rather have a penny every day for a month, or would you rather just have $1 million now? And if you do the math, it's very easy to think like, you want the $1 million now because a penny ain't shit. But if you, doubled it and compounded it for exactly 30 days, you'll start to realize as the compounding interest comes, when do the rewards really start? So very later on in your skill development. And it's the same thing with doing this. It takes a really long time to get enough to where eventually you start to see this exponential growth. And until then, you really just got to get to work and learn from the best people you can. Learn all that you can and be as professional as possible along the way. So in this part of the face where the really bright yellows are, I got really excited to put those in because I saved them last. You're always wanting to try to get it to look good. And this is my method, is trying to get it to look good as possible without using white, without using the highlights, without using pure black. Because if you can do that and then you start to use the white and the black at the end, and it's already looking great, it should just really take it to a whole nother level. And so here we are at the end. This is me showing you the finished piece in video. Mind you guys that videos, you're watching this on a screen, so some of the color references are going to be a little off. Some of the tones are going to be a little off. Of course, some of it's edited and changed, and depending on what device you're watching this through. So again, hence the reason why a video is just a video. But you guys are going to need to understand this stuff from a professional and learn all that you can in your toolkit, whether it's you're watching YouTube videos to learn everything you can. But the fast track, if there is one, is always going to be you getting around masters, people who do this. If, for example, you said you wanted to tattoo Santa this great and you're just starting, or somewhere between that and this, just starting and pulling something off like this, you really need to get around somebody who knows what they're doing. Could you still get here? Probably, maybe. I guess it depends on who you are and your tenacity, but I will tell you this, it will absolutely, no doubt, 100% take you longer than necessary, and you're going to make so many mistakes along the way, and tattooing is obviously very permanent, so I wouldn't recommend doing this. I'm going to go ahead and go to this screen here and show you guys a few more things regarding this, maybe kind of even reiterating this. I'm going to show you one thing that's a tool that I actually just got shown by a friend recently. This really seemed to help. So what I'm going to do is, this is an app that I use for editing. I'm actually going to bring up, this is Procreate. I'll just put that out there. I'm going to bring up the photo itself. So this is going to be the image that we used for reference. Okay, so now we're going to go to Procreate, and we're going to see this image. I edited all the stuff out I didn't want, and now we're going to merge these two, so the reference and the Procreate. So I'm going to show you how I got part of my color palette, at least to a little bit, at least to understand it. There we go. So if you have an iPad, if you don't have an iPad and you want to pull stuff off like this, you're just shooting yourself in the foot, so get a fucking iPad. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to bring up the palette here. I actually saw this, I think, on like a quick online video. So now that my palettes are ready, I'm going to grab this image and I'm going to bring it into my palettes and drop it. And it's going to give me every color that I need in terms of reference for this piece. And if you look at that in conjunction with what I pulled out, it's very, very similar. I actually don't see really any colors missing except for one, and that's this sort of minty blue here. And that's a really nice one that I don't have out, but it was easy to achieve with using my whites and dipping it into a blue, which I don't think you can see in the picture, but I did have obviously blue out. I used it in the background. And be able to study this ahead of time, paying attention to the colors I'm using. You know, it's very clearly darker reds, more of a maroon in here, maybe brown, more of a sort of dark red here and a bright red here. Obviously separating pretty hard with the pinks, moving up into the greens and the darker green tones, always protecting my highlights as well. Making sure that this general area, and this is, maybe you're not tattooing Santa, but this is still going to be useful for you to recognize these things and whatever it is you're actually tattooing. And this general area is the only place I see this sort of apple sort of ripening color. It's what it reminded me of, is a apple that's a little bit green still, but has some of the red tones in it. So I made sure I protected that area for that. I saw these really harsh highlights on the nose, the cheek, and of course this whole sort of half moon area, the hat. I really was very careful to protect those areas. So you can see that I did that best I could. I really protected these areas with these highlights and whatnot. And then understanding that there's this really reddish color here in the face, and then going with more of a almost olive yellow ochre color in the forehead. Separating those two really helped me in this image to, you know, get the most out of it. You guys can look at this. Of course, I'll be posting this on Instagram. This is the first time I've actually going to be showing this to anybody is through this video. It's almost Christmas time, so it was exciting and super fun to do. This was no doubt incredibly stressful when I first started. But again, you just remind yourself that you're a professional. This is your job. It is exciting, and sometimes that stress is good. I believe if you're not feeling a little bit of pressure, you're probably not growing. If it's easy for you, then there's nothing to learn. So this definitely stretched me and pushed me. I'm very thankful for the people that have supported me in doing this, and the people that have directly affected me as artists to be able to get where I am. Again, I'll reiterate that if you want to be able to learn how to do this, you can watch this tutorial. It'll maybe kind of scoot you further than you are today. But if you want to go from where you are to where you would like to be, the fast track to it is simply always learning from the master. You know, if you're not an apprentice and you're tattooing, in my opinion, you're absolutely doing it wrong if what you're trying to do is be a professional and be successful. If you're a hobbyist, well, then that's on you. But if you're trying to do this as a full-time job or do it as a career, or you already work in a shop and you're trying to get better, you need to learn from people who are better than you. You definitely don't always want to be the best in the room. I'm often finding myself learning from people that are painters, artists, actually, in many ways. There's always something you can learn from it. And keep plugging away and learning what you need to learn to be able to get to those next levels. You're not going to go from A to Z, right? You will over time, but you're going to go from A to B. Learn all the tools that you can. If you're already a tattooer, you know that setting up your environment sometimes takes quite a bit of energy and focus, and taking the time to do that appropriately helps you to not cut corners, how to not skimp on pigments because they're expensive, how to not get out, you don't want to skimp on your needles because they're expensive. You want to get out what's necessary, and maybe even a little bit of experimental stuff too, to where you have something out in case you wanted to try it, because that's how you're going to learn. So going from, wherever you are now to wherever you want to go, it's simple, guys. Always keep working at it, but get as close to the real thing in terms of, a master tattooer or somebody who's doing what it is you're trying to achieve. Get as close to them as possible. Add value to them in their lives, and you'll be surprised and shocked how much they're willing to give back. There's, of course, infinite amounts of other things I could bring up regarding this, but not in an hour. So thank you guys for sticking with me and watching this. And let me know what you got out of this. If there was something, if there's any questions or there's something that that really hit home for you, go in the comments and do that. Follow us on Instagram. I'm Joshua Ray Farmer, and this is High Sierra Tattoo Co., where you can find the other artists. I spoke quite a bit about Midna, an artist that works here today, so you guys should go check out her work. She has a lot of her paintings online, and you guys can see that there. And let her know I sent you. Thanks for watching this, and I'll see you next time.